It all began on the eve of the summer solstice 6 years ago. That year, Ted was engaged to a beauty named Ruby. They were planning to move in together in mid-September when Ted was promised a 2-bedroom apartment in exchange for his current 1-bedroom. But then he and Ruby had a big fight. The cause was her cousin's wedding, to which Ruby was invited without Ted. This was a serious breach of etiquette. Engaged couples were considered equal to married ones and were always invited together. I bet they didn't separate other engaged couples, Ted grumbled. Ruby also understood that this was an insult to Ted because of his former bad boy reputation. Although he had never done anything bad to her or her cousin, whom he had never even seen. Yes, you're right, honey, Ruby sighed. But I can't miss such an event and stay home. If this damned wedding was on any other weekend, I'd gladly stay home, Ted fumed. Even if I was invited, I'd still make up an excuse not to go. I don't blame your cousin, she chooses her guests. But you, how could you accept such a humiliating invitation, knowing you'd have to go without me? They continued to argue, and when Ruby angrily left Ted's apartment on the morning of the solstice eve, their engagement was broken off. If your damn cousin is more important than your boyfriend, you can stay there forever. Ted shouted after her. I don't want to see you again. An hour later, he already regretted his words. Ted called Ruby's mobile several times, but it was turned off. Ted and Ruby had plans for a big party with friends out of town. Now Ted went there alone, enjoying his newfound bachelor freedom. At the party, he danced several times with a pretty girl named Ava. She was there with her fiancé Declan, who clearly had drinking problems. Ted wasn't closely acquainted with Ava, but he found her quite attractive. When Declan got plastered, Ted volunteered to help Ava drag him to the car. Thank you, Ava smiled gratefully. You're a real gentleman. They briefly returned to the party, and then decided to take a romantic twilight walk to the nearby lake. Ted and Ava went out onto a small pier by the lake and sat down side by side. The air was warm, crickets chirping all around. Ava moved closer to Ted. You know, I've heard about your bad boy reputation, she said with a mischievous smile. Oh really? And what have you heard? Ted smirked. That you're quite the heartbreaker. But it seems that doesn't scare me. Ted thought to himself, damn, why do beautiful girls always fall for bad boys? They started kissing, and soon passion overtook them both. Maybe we should go to the guest house? Ava suggested. Declan and I rented a room there for the night, but he's clearly not going to use it. In the morning, they were woken up by Declan's wild scream as he discovered Ava in bed with Ted. You, slut, he yelled, throwing the engagement ring at Ava. When Declan ran away, Ava burst into tears. God, what have I done? I've never cheated before. Hey, don't cry. Ted comforted her awkwardly. These things happen. He'll cool down. But Declan didn't cool down. However, Ted's ex-girlfriend, Ruby, tried to make up. She called him and said, I'm sorry about that stupid trip. You were right. I was the only one invited without a partner. It was terribly humiliating. The whole wedding was ruined for me. Ted checked his incoming calls and confirmed that Ruby had indeed tried to reach him on the night of the solstice. Let's meet and talk, she suggested. Maybe all is not lost? Ted agreed. But less than an hour later, Ruby called again, this time in a rage. You bastard. I heard how you were having fun with that Ava. I'm glad our engagement is broken. At first, Ted wasn't too upset. But after a couple of weeks, he started missing Ruby and called her several times. Each time she told him to go to hell. Ted also tried to contact Ava, but she refused to meet him. He had almost forgotten about her when 2 months later she showed up at his door. We need to talk, Ava said with a concerned look. Ted invited her in, and she got straight to the point. I'm pregnant. And you're the father. Ted stared at Ava, not believing his ears. Are you sure? He stammered. Absolutely, Ava nodded, and tears rolled down her cheeks. You were my only one. They talked for several hours. Ava said she was going to keep the baby and asked Ted if he was ready to share the responsibility for what they had done. Damn, Ted thought. What have I gotten myself into? But out loud he said, listen, I understand it's better for a child to have 2 parents. Let's give it a try. I'm ready to give our relationship a chance. Ava was a beautiful, sweet girl with a reputation as a good girl. Not as sweet as Ruby, but not a bad option for a wife, Ted decided. We should get married as soon as possible, he suggested. You really want that? Ava was surprised. Well, love is an important part of marriage, and we can't deny that something sparked between us that night, Ted grinned. Maybe when we have a child, that feeling will ignite again. Ava stayed with him for the night. In the morning, she said she was very happy. I've made a decision and I intend to follow through with it properly, Ted thought. The next day, they went together to Ava's parents to announce the news. It was the first and last time Ted visited their house. Ava's mother, Agnes, threw a real fit. You damn scoundrel! She yelled at Ted. You've defiled my innocent daughter. She threatened to sue him and promised to punish him in every possible way. Ava's father seemed to be a spineless weakling who allowed his harpy wife to spew venom without saying a word. Great in-laws, Ted thought grimly. Just perfect. Ted learned that Ava's parents owned a small printing shop, already in its second generation. Agnes was the fearsome boss there. Once their business had thrived, but now things were going from bad to worse. The competition has become simply brutal, Agnes complained. Ted was unemployed at the time. Agnes, seeing a chance to control him, demanded that he start working in the printing shop for peanuts. No way! Ted snorted. I get more on unemployment benefits. Instead, he got a part-time job with a local driller. Agnes, furious at his refusal, reported Ted to the employment service, claiming he was refusing offered work. But she achieved nothing. Then she hired a lawyer to draw up a prenuptial agreement that would leave Ted with no rights to anything in case of divorce. Like hell, I'll sign such a contract, Ted thought, and asked his friend Finley to rewrite the document, making it more fair. Ava signed the new version without telling her mother a word. 2 months later, Ted and Ava got married at the city hall. The ceremony was modest, with 2 witnesses, Finley and Ava's best friend. 5 months later, they had a son. Ted and Ava's relationship gradually grew into something resembling real love. The next 2.5 years were the happiest in their marriage. A few months after the wedding, Ted had an opportunity to buy a well drilling business on favorable terms. The previous owner had fallen in love with a female doctor at dance classes and decided to move north with her. With the help of the doctors and the former owner's guarantees, Ted easily got a bank loan. Things were looking up. But when their son turned 2.5 and was sent to daycare, problems began. Ava returned to work at the printing shop. Her mother, seeing her daughter as the future owner of the business, increased her pernicious influence. Ted noticed how Ava gradually changed under her mother's influence. Their family life, which had been so good when Ava was at home with the child, started turning into a routine. Let's have another child, Ted suggested one day. No, out of the question, Ava cut him off. I have so much work at the printing shop now. Ted didn't start complaining right away. He understood that Ava was bending over backwards to save the family business, which her mother was driving to ruin with outdated management methods. Listen, why don't you come work with me instead? Ted suggested one day. My business is doing great, I'll pay you a good salary. But Ava flatly refused. Oil prices were rising, and heat pumps were becoming an increasingly profitable investment. Ted's business was thriving. Although he was swamped with work, he tried to help Ava around the house as much as he could. Their marriage was no longer perfect, but it was still holding at an acceptable level. Sometimes they even had good moments. I'm really trying my best, Ted thought. He tried to convince Ava to quit her low-paying job and get rid of her mother's pernicious influence. But everything was going awry. Ava started taking their son with her to her parents more and more often on weekends. After a while, Ted got fed up with this, and they had their first serious argument. Ava seemed to understand that she had gone too far. She promised to spend more time at home. But it turned out to be an empty promise that was soon forgotten. Just 3 months after their serious disagreement, Ava returned to what she had been doing before. Their social life with friends came to a knot. Damn it, after so many years of fruitless attempts, her mother has finally managed to drive us apart, Ted thought bitterly. And then their son told him something interesting. Dad, Who's Uncle Toby? He was kissing Mom when we were coming back from Grandma's dacha. Ted wasn't surprised. He understood that sooner or later this was bound to happen. Looks like our marriage is going to hell, he thought. And, to his surprise, he felt not so much sadness as relief. Ted realized that ahead of him lay a future without the unbearable mother-in-law who had been trying her best to ruin his life. In recent years, Ava had been siding with her mother more and more often, so Ted didn't care anymore who she would end up with. Nevertheless, he felt that he should give Ava one last chance to save their marriage. At least for their son's sake. On Friday evening, Ava, as usual, informed Ted, "Sorry, but I need to go to Mom's tomorrow morning. I'll be back on Sunday." Sunday evening, you mean? Ted thought grimly. He decided it was time for a serious talk. "Listen, why don't you stay? You were there last weekend. Let's spend time as a family instead? We could invite friends over for a barbecue. We haven't done anything like that in ages." Ava looked at him in surprise. "I promised Mom I'd help with her friends." Friends? Since when did Mom's friends become more important than ours? Ted couldn't hold back. "Or do you mean one special friend? That damn Toby who seems to be spending all weekends with you? Will he be there too?" At the mention of Toby, a flicker of fear passed through Ava's eyes. But she quickly composed herself. "He's just an old family friend." "He's not my friend. I don't even know if Mom invited him." "And how old is this old family friend?" "I think he's 30. "Aw, and probably a handsome bachelor," Ted sneered. "Actually, he's married," Ava snapped. "It's just that his wife is currently on a 3-month assignment in Africa, in the UN administration." "Of course," Ted scoffed. "And what kind of relationship do you have with this Toby?" "Purely business, of course," Ava exclaimed. "What do you take me for?" "I don't know anymore," Ted sighed. "You cheated on your boyfriend when we met. Who's to say you won't cheat again?" Ava flared up with anger. "Don't you dare insult me. It was different then. I was young and fell in love with you. And you should know that I still love you." "Love?" Ted laughed bitterly. "Let's be honest. You have very strange ways of showing your so-called love. Our marriage has turned into a parody. I won't even mention sex, it's practically non-existent. You prefer to abandon your husband and spend weekends with this Toby. And yet you keep talking about love. How do you think I can believe such nonsense after everything you're doing?" Ted took a deep breath and continued. "I'm fed up with your mother and her nasty antics. I'm ready to offer you fair divorce terms so you can do whatever you want with your dear Toby." Ava turned pale. "Divorce? Are you serious? You can't demand a divorce just because I want to see my mom. Have you lost your mind?" "No, I'm in my right mind," Ted replied. "And it's not about you wanting to see your mom. It's about you spending 7 days a week with her and this Toby, from morning till night. If your own family still means anything to you, please forget about Toby and stay home for the weekend. Let's talk about our problems and try to find a solution before it's too late." "Of course I love you," Ava sobbed. "But I promised Mom I'd come. I can't let her down. Please, be patient for a little longer. I promise you'll be rewarded. You haven't forgotten that next Friday is the eve of the summer solstice? We'll spend the whole day together. And in July we have a whole week of vacation in the cottage." "Well, what a royal favor," Ted exclaimed sarcastically. "At the end of next month, I'll get a whole week with my beautiful beloved wife. What a gift of fate. And your solstice favor, by any chance, isn't related to Toby being somewhere else? Maybe he's going on vacation with his wife and won't have time for you?" "Poor thing." Ava burst into tears. You're just unbearable. Do you think this is funny? Do you have any idea what it's like to be married to you?" Ted felt anger overtaking him. "You know what, Ava? I see that this Toby is more important to you than your own family. Fine, to hell with you. Go to your mommy. But you're not taking our son with you." Now Ava couldn't contain her fury. "You're accusing me of cheating. Treating me like a cheap whore. Mom was right, you're a real jerk." She broke into loud screams. Ted realized he had gone too far. He understood that there was indeed something between Ava and this Toby, but decided not to pursue the topic further. There was little, if anything, left of their marriage. Nevertheless, he decided to make one last attempt to save the relationship. The only reason he didn't leave immediately and kick Ava out was that he could get much better terms in the divorce if he caught her cheating. Ted realized that further arguments with Ava were pointless. He needed to get some air and think. He felt like he could use a drink. And since he didn't like drinking alone, he headed to his favorite pub. Sitting at the bar with a glass of scotch, Ted noticed Mona, a friend of his ex-girlfriend Ruby. She was sitting at a table with her husband. Ted approached them. "Hi, Mona. Listen, do you know how Ruby's doing?" Mona looked at him in surprise. "Don't you know? She's back in town. She divorced her husband Arthur, bought a small house here and moved in a couple of weeks ago. She was asking about you." Mona gave Ted Ruby's phone number. "Here. Call her. She's waiting for your call." Ted decided to call right away. What the hell, he thought. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Ted dialed the number, holding his breath. After several rings, he heard a familiar voice. "Hello? Hi, Ruby. It's Ted. Your, ex-boyfriend. If you still remember me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ted was already prepared to hear an angry tirade or a dial tone, but instead Ruby responded with unexpected warmth. "Ted? My goodness, it's been ages. Of course I remember you. How are you?" They talked for almost an hour. Ruby told him about her failed marriage, about how she decided to start life anew in her hometown. Ted shared his problems with Ava without going into details. "Listen," he said finally, "maybe we could meet? Chat, remember the good old days?" "You know what, let's do it," Ruby replied after a brief pause. "Tomorrow's Saturday. How about lunch?" They agreed to meet at a small cafe in the city center. After hanging up, Ted felt a wave of emotions wash over him. He remembered how he and Ruby used to be, how deeply they loved each other. Maybe we still have a chance? He thought. Returning home, Ted found that Ava was already asleep. Or pretending to be asleep. He didn't care either way. When he woke up in the morning, Ava was already gone. She had left for her mother's as planned. Ted did some work with his equipment, and at 1 o'clock he was standing at the entrance of the cafe, waiting for Ruby. He was nervous, like a teenager before his first date. 15 minutes passed, and Ruby still hadn't shown up. Ted started to worry. What if she changed her mind? But then he saw her. Ruby was still as beautiful as ever, even more womanly than he remembered. A little girl was walking beside her. When Ruby hugged him in greeting, Ted felt the old desire flare up inside him. He barely restrained himself from kissing her right there on the street. "This is my daughter, Jennifer," Ruby introduced the girl. They entered the cafe and sat down at a table. While Jennifer was engrossed in coloring the children's menu, Ruby suddenly asked, "Ted, tell me honestly. Why did you want to see me? What's the real reason?" Ted was momentarily taken aback. He hadn't expected such a direct question. But then he decided to be honest. "You know, Ruby, I've thought long and hard about how to answer that. I could say something clever or beautiful. But the truth is, I've missed you. All these years." He paused, gathering his thoughts, and continued, "Remember that saying, faith, hope, love? That's my reason. I believe that we could have something. I hope that you've thought about it too. And, Ruby, I still love you." Ruby looked at him with wide eyes. She clearly hadn't expected such a confession. "Oh, Ted," she finally exhaled. I don't know what to say. This is so unexpected." She was silent for a moment, fidgeting with her napkin, then looked him resolutely in the eyes. "You know, I want to be honest with you too. I've made 3 big mistakes in my life. And the first one was that wedding." Ted listened, holding his breath, as Ruby recounted how she had been humiliated at that wedding, how she regretted going there. "You were right," she said. "They just used me there. They even tried to set me up with the groom's brother, can you believe it? I got upset and left. And then," Ruby continued, "I made my second big mistake. When I came back and found out about you and Ava. I was so angry, so hurt. I refused to talk to you when you called. And I still loved you." She sighed. "I started dating Arthur just to get back at you. I thought I'd dump him and come back to you. But then Ava got pregnant, and everything went haywire. Ruby looked at her daughter, who was eagerly munching on French fries. My third mistake, Ruby looked at her daughter and said in a lower tone, was marrying Arthur. If I hadn't been so stupid, you and I could have gotten married. We could have had our own family. Ted looked at Ruby with understanding. He reached out and gently placed his hand on Ruby's. Hey, listen. We both made mistakes. I made a huge mistake too, sleeping with Ava that night. Yes, we had broken up, and technically I was free. But I should have fought for you, not jumped into bed with the first girl I met. He looked Ruby in the eyes, but you know what? It's never too late to fix things. What do you think? Ruby was completely stunned. What did you say? She asked. Ted sighed. Ava and I are having problems. Serious problems. I'm sure she's cheating on me, but I don't have proof yet. Last night, before I went to the pub to meet Finley, I asked her to stay home for the weekend instead of going to her mother's. But she left anyway, he continued. I decided, it's over between us. I'll file for divorce as soon as I find evidence. And if I don't find any, I'll do it within a month anyway. My God, I thought you were happy, Ruby murmured. We were happy, Ted replied. You know, they say, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. That's how it turned out for us. Over time, I really fell in love with her. But now it's over. He looked Ruby straight in the eyes. What about you? Are you seeing anyone? Yes, I met a nice guy online, but we haven't met in person yet. We have our first lunch date tomorrow, she replied. So I'm too late? Ted chuckled. But I'd like to put in an application for the role of backup plan. In case he doesn't turn out to be your dream prince. What do you say? Ruby was silent for several seconds, not taking her eyes off him. Isn't this a real date for you? She finally asked. Meeting you today is the best thing that's happened to me in a long time, Ted replied. But I'm quite selfish, and I want to see you more often. Maybe even become more than friends. Ruby shook her head. No, I don't think it's a good idea to have you as a backup plan. Not at all. Noticing the disappointment in his eyes, she continued, you're my first choice. And if you're serious and promise to be honest with me, I don't need any backup plans. I'll cancel tomorrow's date. Ted couldn't believe his luck. Today's my lucky day, he said with a smile. Just remember, I never cheated on you when we were engaged. You left, and I was alone when I met Ava. I won't cheat on her until we split up. But we have kids almost the same age, and we can start as friends. If you want, of course. Ruby nodded, agreeing. I've rented a nice summer house on the coast for the third week of July, Ted continued. And I promise that by then, Ava and I will have gone our separate ways. Ted and Ruby's relationship grew closer. Meanwhile, Ted and Ava's marriage deteriorated further. They attended a social gathering where their coldness was evident to others. Ava left for a trip with their son to Legoland, followed by a visit to her cousin. Ted spent this time with Ruby and her daughter. Surprisingly, Ava called Ted every night during her trip, which was unusual. Ted discovered that Toby, Ava's lover, had joined them on the Legoland trip. He learned this through subtle questioning of his son, who mentioned a secret involving scary wolves. Ted was angry that Ava had allowed Toby to threaten their son. He decided to take action, calling Ruby and his friend Finley for help in addressing the situation. The couple's vacation plans were altered, with Ted planning to leave Ava and spend time with Ruby instead. Ted figured that Toby wouldn't be able to resist temptation when he went on vacation. So he installed an expensive wireless mini camera in their bedroom with a receiver connected to a flash drive hidden in the garage. The camera was connected to a motion sensor and worked even in near total darkness. In his work pickup truck, a Nissan, Ted kept new locks for the house and cardboard boxes to pack Ava's things when it came time to evict her from the house. After 2 torturous days at home, with Ava now pretending to be a caring wife, Ted packed clothes for himself and his son for their week of vacation. On Saturday morning, they left as planned. Ava said she was sorry she had to stay home and work that week, and that she would miss them terribly. Ted didn't kiss her goodbye, but promised to call at least once a day. Ava even stood on the driveway waving as they drove away. Ted felt sorry that the woman he had loved so much had turned into such a lying piece of work. But instead of heading to Nicholas's cottage, he went to Ruby's garage, where he hid his car. Nicholas and his wife knew about Ted's problems and agreed to pretend he was there, but to leave immediately if Ava called them. At 6 in the evening, Ruby drove past Ted's house but didn't see anything unusual. At 8 o'clock, she went on another reconnaissance mission, and when she arrived back at her garage, she informed Ted that this time she had seen a silver Volvo XC90 in his driveway. At 11 o'clock, Ted took Ruby's car and drove past the house again. The Volvo was still there. At 1 in the morning, he rode Ruby's bicycle, snuck into his garage, and turned on the monitor. Bingo, exactly what he wanted to see. Ava and Toby were coming out of the bathroom. Now that Ted knew he had all the evidence needed for a divorce on his terms, he started to feel a little better about this difficult situation. Ava wasn't stupid, not at all, so Ted was a bit surprised at how clumsily she had deceived him. It was as if she wanted to be caught and was making it easy for Ted. First, she had taken Toby with her on vacation, and then she had allowed her mother to threaten their son with wolves. Who knows, maybe she wanted to be dumped, and Toby was supposed to take care of her. Ted waited until they fell asleep, watching them on the monitor, before proceeding with his plan. They lay down on the bed, and Ava said, "Let's get some sleep to be in good shape." Toby replied, "I'm going to miss you so much that every weekend without you will be terribly painful. Even when my wife is home. Why can't we see each other at least once a month in the future?" "Because my marriage is in a much worse crisis than I could have imagined," Ava replied. "Ted is still so angry about my weekends with you that he didn't even bother to kiss me goodbye when he left for a week. I made a terrible mistake by not staying home that damn weekend when he begged me to. Our marriage has been a complete mess ever since. You're a wonderful lover, but I want Ted and I to have a good life again," Ava added with sadness in her voice. "Too late for that, you cheater," Ted muttered under his breath, before Toby responded, "You have nothing to regret about that weekend. I had a good time, and you have to agree that once a month in the future we'll have something to look forward to." Ava now sounded a bit irritated and undoubtedly began to feel remorse. "No, Toby, our wonderful love story is becoming history. And I've turned into a good, faithful, loving wife who does everything, I mean everything, to win back her husband's love. But why think about that now? Until then, I'm still all yours. Be a good boy and don't waste a minute of our wonderful time." Ted didn't hear Toby's response, but obviously, he couldn't entertain Ava anymore without a few hours of rest. And after a while, they both fell asleep. Ted pressed a button on his mobile phone. His friend Finley woke up after a few rings, and Ted said, "I've got bingo. Are you ready to play?" Finley promised to be there within 15 minutes, although Ted could handle Toby, who was lying in his bed, on his own. The main reason he wanted his friend's presence was that he could witness that Ted didn't use force against either Toby or Ava. If he went there alone, he was sure Ava's mother would find some lawyer who would make up a nasty story and sue him for being rough. Another good reason was that Finley had a very good video camera, and he loved using it. He was often hired to film weddings, and Ted wanted to get close-ups that he didn't have on his own camera. Finley arrived as promised. They briefly discussed the plan of action and then quietly entered Ted's house. The bedroom door was closed. Ted opened it a few centimeters and saw that his wife and Toby were sleeping under the blanket, pressed tightly against each other. While Finley prepared his camera, Ted nodded, and they got to work. Ted flung the door open. Finley turned on a bright flashlight and started filming. Ted approached the bed, pulled off the blanket without waking the sleeping couple, and let Finley film them for at least 5 seconds before shouting, "What the hell is going on here?" Ava and Toby woke up in complete shock. It took them a few seconds to realize what was happening and get used to the bright light. Then Ava recognized Ted and started screaming, "No, no, 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 no." Ted took the camera in his hands and told Finley to get the naked Toby out of the house. Finley grabbed Toby firmly by the hair and dragged him from the bed to the bedroom exit. There was some noise and screaming, but Ted stayed in the bedroom and couldn't see what was happening. Finley returned shortly after, looking for Toby's keys. He found them in his pants, went outside, and threw them onto the driveway. Then they heard Toby driving away. Meanwhile, Ava had stopped screaming and started crying. Ted thought she understood that the game was over because Ava didn't make any stupid attempts to explain what had happened. Ted said to her, "You've ruined our marriage. Get dressed and get out of my house. You don't have a car anymore, so Finley will call you a taxi. Tomorrow there will be new locks on the doors. I'll pack your things in cardboard boxes, and you can pick them up tomorrow afternoon." Ava started yelling at Ted, "You can't do this. You have no right to do such nasty things to your wife. I'll never accept this." "I don't care what you accept or don't accept," Ted replied coldly. "Please read our prenuptial agreement. A copy is kept in your personal bank safe. You're leaving this house. Please don't do this to me," Ava begged. "Please calm down and let's talk." "Sure, we can talk tomorrow," Ted said. "Come tomorrow at 4 o'clock to pick up your things and divide everything we own together. Come alone. Remember, your parents are forbidden to step on my property." The taxi arrived, and Ava had to wait 10 minutes before she was ready to leave. Finley went home to sleep, and Ted called Ruby to tell her that he had caught Ava and a man named Toby in the marital bed, which meant the end of their marriage. Ted had won the battle again, but he felt only sadness about the ruined marriage and how it all ended. He couldn't sleep, so he went to the garage, took the videotape, put it in the VCR, rewound it, and pressed play. Well, everything happened exactly as he thought. They were having fun. Then the screen remained empty for a long time until it showed what he had already seen at night, and then the moment when he and Finley entered the room and Ava and Toby woke up. Ted still couldn't sleep from the excitement, so he started taking Ava's clothes out of closets and drawers, neatly folding them in the living room. At 9 in the morning, Ruby arrived with the kids, bringing breakfast in a basket. Rummaging through Toby's wallet, Ted found his wife's phone number, who was away in Africa. He called her and told her that he had caught Toby with Ava in his bed and filmed it on video. Toby's wife was furious but asked him to send her photos by email. Ted promised to do so after he edited a copy of the video for Ava, in case she objected to the terms of the divorce. Ted changed the locks, carefully packed Ava's things, and labeled the contents of each box. He didn't feel the need to take revenge by damaging or destroying his ex-wife's belongings. Then Ted took a chainsaw and cut their almost new and very expensive marital bed into small pieces, which he dumped in a pile on the driveway. At 4 o'clock, a pale Ava arrived alone in an old Ford Transit van from the printing shop. She stared at the pile of debris that used to be their bed for a long time before entering the house. Ted had prepared coffee in the living room and invited Ava to sit down. She agreed, sat down, and, sobbing, began a long speech about how much she loved Ted, how sorry she was for her terrible mistake, and that she would never repeat it if only Ted could forgive her. "I'll work less at the printing shop, spend all weekends with the family, never go to Mom's parties without you. Let's have another child," Ava pleaded. Ted replied, 3 weeks ago, these promises could have saved our marriage. But today, after what you did, it's too late. I'm sorry, Ava, but we have no future together." Ava started her pleas again. Ted let her finish and then asked, "Do you think I'm a complete idiot? Do you think I'll believe your lies about Toby, a 30-year-old jerk who has such a warped view of people that he spends weekends in the company of a nasty old witch like your mother?" Ava was silent, and Ted continued, "You're a very beautiful woman, Ava, so I can't blame him. But I blame you for being so available, for allowing him to ruin our marriage and make our child very unhappy. Why, Ava? Why? Was I such a bad husband that you had to fool around with this jerk?" Ava sobbed, "It's not your fault. I never stopped loving you. You were my only true love, but I know you slept with many women, and I had no one but you. I'm sorry I couldn't resist the temptation to do it with just one other man. I promise it won't happen again." Ted replied, "Well, now you've got what you wanted. I hope you're happy. At least your mother should be very pleased. She achieved what she wanted all the time we were together. Please make her even happier by telling her that I don't care about what you did. Thanks to your infidelity, I've gained my freedom and I'm going to marry a woman who really loves me. Don't you understand that you ended our marriage that Friday before the solstice when I begged you to spend the weekend with the family, and you chose to have fun with Toby at your mother's house? Did you really think I would agree to be a damn cuckold? The only reason I didn't kick you out of the house immediately was that I needed evidence of your infidelity to get rid of you without paying a penny. Don't forget that I even offered you a fair divorce, but to my surprise, you refused. A smart person like you should have understood that I would never agree to be a poor cuckolded husband with such a wife." Ava, choking on tears, replied, "I didn't want a divorce then, and I don't want one now because I love you. Of course, I realized that our son told you about Toby, and you suspected something. But I never thought you would have evidence. I regretted the affair and promised myself that Toby would be my first and last fling. But I decided to fulfill this promise as Toby and I had planned. The night with him in our house was supposed to be the grand finale, the very last meeting with him and my last infidelity ever. Honestly, I was glad it was over. I can't deny that your behavior after that Friday made me think about the problems I created for our marriage. I started to fear the worst when you began treating me like I didn't exist and refused to spend time with me. That's why I wanted to be a good wife again and do everything possible to win back your love, to really make you happy. I wanted to pamper you during our week at the cottage and do everything I could to get pregnant as soon as possible and give you the child you wanted so badly. I was even looking for a new job." Ted sighed. "I'm afraid it's too late now." "You're right. That Friday before the solstice was your last chance. Then you didn't care about me, and now, after what happened last night, we have only one possible solution." Ted handed Ava the divorce papers. "Sign them so we can settle this amicably," he said calmly. Ava looked at him uncomprehendingly. "What do you mean?" "Listen," Ted sighed. "Whether you want it or not, everything will be according to the terms of the prenuptial agreement. A copy is in your bank safe, remember? You'll get what belongs to you, and I'll get mine. That means practically everything except your clothes." "What about Sammy?" Ava asked quietly. "I want full custody," Ted replied firmly. "But you'll be able to see him quite often when you find your own place. Just don't think about dragging him to that snake pit where you're living now." Ava turned pale. "Wait a minute. Are you saying I have no rights to any of our property?" "That's right," Ted nodded. "The house, cars, my stocks and bank accounts, the drilling company, all of this is my personal property. Don't forget that it was your mother who insisted on the prenuptial agreement. I worked hard and earned good money. I paid for everything here, and your dear mommy only gave you pocket money that was barely enough for clothes." Ted paused and then added, "By the way, I hired specialists to check your mother's printing shop. By the end of the year, she'll be bankrupt. Your mother owes you a lot of money. You need to get it before the bankruptcy, otherwise, the bank will take everything." "What?" Ava gasped. "Listen," Ted continued. "If you agree to an amicable divorce, I can pay for a lawyer who will help you get the money back. Your mother will lose it anyway. So it's better if you get it. Yes, it will be like a kick in the ass for your mother, but the main thing is that with this money you'll be able to buy a decent apartment where you can take Sammy." "You can't." Ava screamed in horror. "What am I supposed to do now? I have nothing left, I'm even losing my job. Accept the terms of the prenuptial agreement without objection and I promise to help you get your remaining salary. And don't forget, you have your great love, Toby. Let him take care of you now." "He can't. He's married." "Not anymore," Ted smirked. "His wife wasn't thrilled when I talked to her. And when I sent her some photos and videos, she went ballistic. Promised to file for divorce. So congratulations, Ava. Toby is all yours now." "God, you're insane," Ava exclaimed. "How could you ruin their marriage?" "How could he ruin mine?" Ted retorted. "Forgot how he was fooling around with my wife in our marital bed?" After long negotiations, they finally agreed to meet next Saturday to divide the family property. Ted allowed Ava to take whatever she wanted. Ava promised to pick up her things as soon as she found an apartment. Ted intended to give the rest to charity. When Ava left, Ted went to Ruby's, who had prepared a romantic dinner for them. It was a wonderful evening. Now Ted was happy to come home after work to a house full of joy and laughter. He and Ruby had become a real family, spending weekends together with the children. At first, they thought the children would need time to get used to the new situation. But to their surprise, the kids quickly accepted their new parents and got along great with each other. The idea with the postcard was Ted's. He bought it, and Ruby wrote on it in her elegant handwriting, "Dear friends. Accept my congratulations on winning the bet. You did what any parent can only dream of, convinced your only daughter to leave her loving husband and become a mistress for a married cheater. She should be grateful to you for the rest of her life. Sincerely yours, a faithful friend. Ted sent the postcard to Ava's father. Soon after, gossip circulated in town that he had opposed Toby's weekly visits to woo Ava, but his wife had remained mute on the matter. Ava's father felt a mix of sorrow and rage. Ava had wept for hours after Ted's departure. The postcard was the final blow, and Ava's father at last realized that if he had acted with backbone, he could have halted his wife's folly long ago. He rued his cowardice and becoming a subject of ridicule. After fortifying himself with drink, he voiced his humble opinion to his wife. Their quarrel escalated into a full-blown altercation, culminating in her summoning the police and him spending the night in a jail cell. The day prior to his wife's release from the hospital, he packed his belongings and left home. With no minor children involved, their divorce was settled in 3 months. Ava consented to an amicable divorce, accepting all of Ted's terms without protest. She didn't engage a lawyer, and the divorce proceeded smoothly. Ted gained custody of their child but assured Ava he wouldn't obstruct her. She could see her son as much as she desired, up to 182 days annually, once she secured her own residence. However, Ted prohibited her from taking the child to her mother's house or dacha. Ava didn't object, as her relationship with her mother had soured, and she had quit the printing shop. Her mother was livid when Ava demanded her outstanding wages, refused payment, and grew even more irate when Ava took legal action. Ava prevailed in court, and the bailiffs managed to recover her money 2 weeks before the printing shop declared bankruptcy. The bank contested the transfer of funds to Ava, but Ted found her a competent lawyer who persuaded the bank to withdraw the lawsuit. Toby, who had fled Ted's house nearly naked, was apprehended by traffic police targeting drunk drivers returning from festivities, as he and Ava had celebrated their love story's happy conclusion with a fine dinner featuring the best Rioja wine and Ted's cognac. The scantily clad Toby was taken to the police station for a blood test. Later, one of Ava's friends informed her that he was fined and had his driver's license suspended for 2 years. Toby's wife kept her word. She returned home, left him, and initiated divorce proceedings. She now works for the UN in Geneva, where she resides with an Italian colleague she met while working in Africa. Toby attempted to drown his personal troubles in alcohol, forcing him to take leave from work. He never encountered Ava again and ignored her numerous calls when she desperately tried to reach him. He had vowed to care for her if her marriage faltered. Now she learned the harsh truth. All his words were hollow, and she had been naive enough to believe every line he fed her. Eventually, she recognized what a pitiful individual he truly was and abandoned all attempts and hopes for a joyous future with him. The extra funds from the printing shop enabled Ava to purchase an apartment in a desirable area, and she had no difficulty securing new employment. She met Ted periodically due to their child, but they never discussed personal matters. Despite all that had transpired, Ted still couldn't help but acknowledge that Ava was a strikingly beautiful woman and was somewhat puzzled why she wasn't dating anyone yet. Especially now that she had finally broken free from her mother's influence. Ted and Ruby wed as soon as his divorce from Ava was finalized. They sold both of their former houses and bought one together. We hope you liked the story. Please show us your support by clicking the like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon to receive notifications about new stories.